Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is the One More Book podcast and my name is Florence. If you're new here, thank you for joining me and I hope that you like, comment, and if you like what you see, please don't forget to subscribe. I talk about books. I live in Germany, so I think that gives context to the books that I like to read. And today I want to talk about the books that I read in January of 2026. I cannot believe we are already in the second month of January. It's just so crazy. January felt, I think for many people, January feels long. For me, it felt quite short. I don't know. It just felt really short for me. But still, I managed to read, I believe I read 7 books in January. So let's dive into it. Let me know in the comment section which books you read in January. If you managed to read any book in January, it really doesn't matter as long as you did some reading. So let me know in the comment section. So let's start. The first book that I read is actually an audiobook. I listened to the audiobook. I read it together with the Bookmark Book Club. That's a book club based in the UK, but it's an online book club which I'm part of. It's a Caribbean read. The author is Caribbean, Marcia Hutchinson. I believe this is her debut novel, and it is semi-autobiographical from what I've gathered from her interviews and just from having conversations with people. And to me, this was a really amazing read. I rated it 5 stars because it was absolutely relatable, but in a really sad way. So in this book, we follow a young girl. She's called Mercy. She is of Jamaican descent. Her parents are both from Jamaica, but she's been born in Bradford in the UK in the 1960s. So we actually meet Mercy when she is still in her mother's womb, so as she's supposed to be born. And I've never had a book like this where I've read books where the narrator is a child, and I absolutely love them because I think child narrators have this freedom to express their emotions without guilt, or they are just more freer. And I think I relate to that because those are things that most of us never got the opportunity to do, still cannot do even now. So Mercy, we meet her when she's being born, and of course she's narrating the book when she's still in the womb. I absolutely loved that. And Mercy is an amazing narrator. She takes us through growing up in this family where I believe she was the 3rd or 4th child, but her parents had two or three other children already in Jamaica before moving to the UK. So she's now in this family. She's actually the middle child. There are 2 other children who are born after her, and she's just trying to survive. And Mercy has this really special cord. She calls it a cord that attaches her to her mom. So she goes through so much. There are so many heavy themes that are addressed in this book: racism, gender disparity, sexual assault, there is domestic violence, there is exploitation, there is misogyny. There is just so many amazing themes that are very important but still heavy. But the author does it in such a unique way because Mercy is like she's telling us about all this from the outside. Some things she experiences, but she actually comes out of her body when these things are happening, and she's like also watching it. So she's like an part of the audience, but she's also the narrator. She does it so well. I absolutely love this book. She has a very unique sense of humor. Mercy, I believe the author, so the way she just brings the story together, you are really deep in these themes, but it's not like a book where you're like, no, that's enough, I have to put it down. No, the way she does it, and even just introducing the importance of books and literature and libraries and reading. Mercy is a reader. So I really, really related to that, and spending time in the library as a child. I just remembered my childhood at that age. So it was an amazing read, one that I would highly, highly recommend if you're looking for a book by a child narrator. It reminded me so much of Annie John, which is a book also by a Caribbean author, Jamaica Kincaid, that I absolutely also loved. So I think that that's a pattern for me, and I will probably pick up another book which has the same pattern. And this author, 5-star read for me, a very amazing way to start the year, and I loved the discussion that we had with the book club. The second book that I read is, I have it here, The Bad Indians Book Club by Patty Kravec, with a foreword by Omar El Akkad. And this was actually a book club pick for my book club, the One More Book Club. We are a physical book club here in Hamburg. Unfortunately, we don't have a digital part to it. So I always have to disappoint many people who write to me and want to join digitally. And we are a physical book club. So this was our book club pick for November. So I moved it because I hadn't read it. So it was part of my 26 for 2026, which I am so happy that I'm ticking off. So this book it started as a friend asked Patty Kravec. Patty Kravec is half, let me read her. She's indigenous. She is of the Anishinaabe group, and she's half Ukrainian. So I believe she's based in, she's from Canada. So she's part of the indigenous community in Canada. So a friend of hers asked her to recommend books by indigenous authors. As we all know, November is when we celebrate indigenous storytelling. So we picked it up in November. So I believe this person also was looking for book recommendations. And Patty Kravec tried to come up with that, and then talked to a friend, or maybe two friends, and they started a podcast. So the podcast, I believe, is also called The Bad Indians Book Club. And from the podcast came the book, which I really, really loved the evolution of that, because I'm sure many people were also asking them, how can we please share the list. So in this book, for me, it felt like a manual or a step-by-step guide on how to be a bad Indian. And in her own explanation, she tells us that a bad Indian is someone who goes against norms, someone who is not exploitative, someone who takes care of themselves, their community, lives in community, reads in community, discusses books in community, and is willing to say no, to be in a smaller group of people who are just no to all these worldly things. And by worldly, that is dominant groups that exploit people, and of course capitalism. So in this book, she also gives us a list, a long list of books that she recommends by indigenous authors in different fiction, non-fiction, from non-binary authors to authors who talk about the environment, like Robin Kimara, so many authors, and also list books by authors who she defines as bad Indians, people who go against the norm, who do not go with the flow. And in this group, she mentions Toni Morrison, of course, Omar El Akkad, who does an amazing foreword for this book. To me, this book felt like years of research and work that some people do online or in their community, and then they just decided to put it together and to gift it to us and show us how we can be bad Indians. I really love the book. As you can see, I tabbed it. It is tabbed to the end. And I highlighted so many passages in it. I really, really enjoyed this book. And it's a book that I will always go back to. Not even just for the list, but for her quotes. I really, really loved it. I gave it a 4-star. Next is Dust, which is by Yvonne Adhiambo Owuor. And funny story, there's always a funny story to how I get my books. So this book was actually, I got it at a book swap. We had a book swap, I believe, a year ago, when we had our first book meetup. We asked everyone to bring like a book that they could swap. And my friend brought this. She said she started reading it, couldn't get into it, so I picked it up. And whenever I've tried to pick it up, I've always just not connected with it. And I shared it online, and some people were like, yeah, I'm also like you, but some were like, please read it, it's an amazing book. So last year I had this challenge of trying to read at least one book by a Kenyan author every month. I failed terribly. So I think towards the end of the year, I was like, Flo, do it. So I picked this up in December. I remember I started reading it on the 9th of December, but I was reading it in tandem with other books, and that is wrong. This book, to quote a review that appeared in the New York Times back in 2014 when the book was released by Taye Selassie. Taye Selassie is another amazing author. She wrote Ghana Must Go. And she said that this book is not for a reader who is in a hurry. You have to give it time. Like, give it time. And she's absolutely right. So I started reading it on the 9th of December and I finished on the 31st of January. Yeah, and to quote what Taye Selassie said, she said, only the reader who truly loves books, books full to the brimming with imagery, will appreciate the power Owuor has made of the classic nation at war novel. Absolutely, she was right. She was right because I gave it time. I actually put all the books aside and just concentrated on it alone. It's to me a book that is jealous. It's like, read only me. And I did that. The book starts with a scene in Nairobi where we see a man running. He's being chased on the streets of Nairobi, and then he is shot. So as he's lying on the ground on the street, a very harrowing scene, he's dying. So, and then he sees his life like flash in front of his eyes. So that's where the scene is set. Then we meet his sister who has just come back to the country. She was in Brazil. She's come back to the country to come back to connect with her family. Then we are introduced also to a dad. So the family is mourning, and that's when we are introduced to them. His dad, who has a very, very interesting, emotional, and painful past, just like Kenya, the history of Kenya, it's scarred and it's not linear. So we meet him too when he comes to Nairobi to collect his son's body. And then later, when they bring the body back to where he's from, his village, we meet his mom. The mom is described as an AK-47 wielding, beautiful, beautiful woman. So I could picture how she looks. And the book is set in an imaginary place in Kenya. I could not place it because it's like, just like the name Dust, it's like set in the northern parts of Kenya. And the I'll say northeastern area of Kenya is very dry, very arid, semi-arid and semi-arid. So it's really dry, it's very dusty, which I think that's where the name came from. But the language they speak is Luo. And from what I know, there are not so many Luos who live in these areas. Luos, we mostly originally we lived in around the west. Yeah, around the west, around the Lake Victoria. But of course, people live everywhere. People move around. So through this traumatic family saga, a family who is mourning, we are told of not only the history of these characters, but the history of Kenya. So the book goes to pre-colonial times where we are told about the war, the First World War, how the colonialists enlisted young Kenyan men to go and join the KAF, Kenya, the King's, something, KRR, something rifles. I will try and see if I can put it here. So they went to join the war and fight in the name of the king. back then. Those are parts of the history that we are told. And then it just moves along to the colonial period. There are massacres that we were never taught in school that are mentioned. I loved the mention of the mobile library. There used to be a library. It's now not in existence, but the Kenya National Library Services offered a library, a mobile library. So especially for the people living in these areas, because they are nomads and pastoralists. So they move around. They had camel, books on a camel. So these camel would move from these different communities and bring these children books. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. I went on the website and now it's been replaced by motorbikes. It felt romantic, but I can understand it. Maybe just doesn't make sense anymore. But those are just the things that are mentioned. So many political assassinations, so many unsolved murders, so many people who were killed during the Moi regime. He was the second president of Kenya, even the first president. There's just so many unsolved murders, people who disappeared. And she mentions that Kenya has 4 languages, that is English, Kiswahili, and silence. Then she adds like memory. It's like people know what happens. Our parents know, our grandparents know because they saw it, but because of the fear that has been instilled in you, you don't talk about it, and you don't talk about it to your descendants. So it's like there's just so much history that is not talked about. And these things are happening because the book actually starts in 2007. I am rambling. It's a really good book. Really good book. I read it with a book club. Unfortunately, the discussion didn't happen, but I'm hoping that we get to discuss it because I have so many thoughts. As you can see, an amazing read. I would give it a 4.5. I would give it a 5. It deserves a 5, but I'm taking the 0.5 because of just how time-consuming it was to read it. But absolutely worth the effort and the time. The next book that I read together with our book club, because we had 2 books over the Christmas break, is Black in Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People by Imani Perry. What Imani Perry does is, for example, like a quilter, someone who makes these blankets that are sewn together. So they collect discarded fabrics and they sew them together. And when they start, it makes no sense. But when they're done, you see the amazing piece that is done. That is what, in my view, Imani Perry did. She went through history from pre-colonial times, the history of Black people. And in each and every scenario, she picked out the color blue. And I found it very interesting because there were things that she mentioned that I have heard about or read about, but never have looked at them in the context that she did, which is why reading is really fun. Because things like blue-black, how someone can say, growing up, it used to be more like an insult or derogatory when someone would say, this person is so dark, they are blue. And for us, I think, because we also really struggle with colorism, especially in Kenya. So there was a way in which someone who was very dark, it was supposed to be a compliment, but to us it felt like an insult because everyone wanted to be light-skinned because we all know the light-skin privileges. So it was very fascinating reading that here. But there are just so many instances that she picked up the color blue through. Like blues, the music, blues like the Tiffany box, the Tiffany ring and the ring that most people want to get proposed to with. And of course, the history of these rings and of course the blue in it. And even the mood, how when people say you are melancholy, when you're depressed or sad, you're feeling blue. She talks about different authors. There's an author she mentions. I wrote it down too. Yeah, she's called Alain Blouin, or something like that. And she was one of the few women who were part of the Pan-African movement. I believe she was even the assistant to Patrice Lumumba, if I'm not, she was Congolese. So, and Blouin, her surname means blue in French. So her story is also included in here. But of course, the blues of the sky, the blues of the water, that several of enslaved people, they were just like, instead of being captured and being turned into slave, I'd rather die by diving into the, I see freedom in the waters from the ships, as the ships were leaving Africa to be taken to the different parts of the, it's just, there's just a lot. And I remember actually watching a YouTube channel that I love, and then there were readers. One of the YouTubers, she talked about listening to the audiobook, and she was like, at some point I could not take it anymore, the mention of the word blue, and I can just imagine it, because it is, everything is blue, 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 blue. So I think that's, for me, that also felt like it made the book not, you're not supposed to enjoy it, but it wasn't an enjoyable experience because it was very, very dense. And then there were some parts where I was just like, that's a bit far-fetched. But I mean, she's a researcher, and I think it's probably something that maybe like a course that she was teaching for a whole semester, but now she compiled it all together into a book. So it felt a lot. It's quite a lot, but I still really, really appreciated so much history that I never knew about. Like the blue car that Kwame Nkrumah had, that was gifted to him by JF Kennedy, and I would love to go to Accra to go see the blue car. It's actually the car he rode in during his inauguration as Ghana's first president. Finding out that Bob Marley had also had actually two blue cars. It was just, one was a German car, very, very interesting, a BMW. So very, very interesting tidbits, things that maybe when you are at a party, you know, you can like, yeah, push, like drop in a few, like during small talk. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star. Then the other book that I also listened to is Paradise Once by Olive Senior. And this is also a Caribbean read that I read together with the Book of Sins book club. Amazing, amazing. And we even had the author came in for the book club discussion. She's quite an amazing woman. So in this book is a historical fiction book that is based on the Taino community. So the Taino community are an indigenous group that existed in the Caribbean in what is now known as Cuba. So unfortunately, they were literally wiped off the face of the earth by Spanish forces. There's a Spanish army that did what colonizers really, really always do. So I would say when I started this book, the author does a really, really amazing job in world building. The book starts in this village called the Maima village. It's a fictional village. So we invited into this village where we meet all these different people. Some are traders, some are, these are spiritual leaders. Women are in the farm. They have their customs. Some are cooking. We are just being introduced to their lives as they are living. And of course, they have names. They have really, really unique names. And there was just so many things. So at the beginning, and of course, as you're listening to an audiobook, you're really trying to catch everything, because it's not like you can always go back and flip through it. So I was concentrating and I was like, oh my God, do I have to remember all these names? And by the end of the book, but it was important because I got to know them. I got attached to them, because when the horrible thing happens, everyone is scattered and their lives are changed. I was already so much invested in it that I wanted to find out what happens after this. And these 4 young people who've been chosen to go on this secret mission, I wanted, like, I was with them. I was like the 5th person. So that really, really made everything make sense in the first few chapters. So it's an amazing book, a history that I would have never have found out. It was even interesting during the book club, people in the Caribbean who they have heard about the Taino community, but they didn't know so much details, because we all know who wrote the books in schools and all the syllabuses that we are using. So you have to go look for the history yourself. This book reminded me the importance of people and communities who are living on the margins, who do not belong to these dominant groups, how important it is for us to keep our stories alive, whether it's oral or written, talking to our descendants, maintaining our languages, telling them about our rituals, our culture, because they might just wipe us out. We've seen it happening, and we see it happening now. We see it happening in Gaza, in Sudan. We see it all over the world happening. So it was a really, really good reminder that let's write things down. Let's talk about, let's be proud of who we are, and let's keep it going further as we also resist. Of course, we have to resist, but resist by living. Actually, existing is a form of resistance. Like I read in a book by a Palestinian author, it is the biggest, the highest form of resistance is actually existing. So absolutely love this. I gave it a 4-star. This was the first book that I actually read, and I've decided to read at least one children's book a month, because I have this thing of, when I'm starting the month, I get so nervous about my reading. I think I have a look at my TBR for the month and I get so scared. Or maybe I've just finished reading a book and I'm not ready to go into the next book. So I need like something like an interlude, a light read. So I'm doing that with children's book because I have so many. I have spent money on children's books for my kids, and they are at that stage of life where they're like, I've read it, so I'm not going to read it again. So I am keeping them because this is my money. These are my books. So this is Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o, and it is illustrated by Vashti Harrison. Beautiful, beautiful illustrations. And I remember when this book came out, I think it was published in 2019. So I think in 2020, during the pandemic, that's when it really blew up. I think because people were home. And it was also a season where it felt like every celebrity was coming up with a book or a children's book. And for some, it felt like a money grab. And I think that's why I wasn't in a rush to buy the book. So I knew about it. I was just like, okay, happy for her, congratulations to her, but I'm not interested. Until maybe 2022, I would say, when I'm part of a community group and we organize book readings. We used to collect different books. So a friend gifted me this book because she was also gifted it by someone in Kenya, because it's in Luo. Luo is actually my mother tongue. So someone gifted it to her for her daughter, but her daughter can't read Luo, or she can't read Luo, so she gave it to me. And I can read Luo. My mom made sure that we grew up knowing how to read Luo. So I had it, but I hadn't read it or read it to my kids. Then I decided to pick it up, and I was just in awe. First of all, of course, the illustration, but the message in this book is we have to be conscious about the issue of colorism, especially how we need to insist that we have the conversation about colorism in the house with our young ones. Even if you're not a parent, even if you can just be a caregiver, caretaker, or there could be children in your vicinity, friends, it doesn't really matter. But these are conversations that we should have with them before they go out into the world, because out there is not for the weak. If adults are affected by colorism, what about these really precious small people who need protection? So she really encourages this important conversation to be had in the house, build these children's confidence, to tell them that there are people who are out here who look like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the color of their skin. Absolutely not. I grew up in a family where it did not really matter. Looks, nobody cared about looks in my family. My parents were all about, are you working hard? Are you excelling? Are you clean? That was it. We just had to be clean. Short nails, short hair, like Vaseline, like you had a shiny face. That was it. There was nothing, I think because we were all dark skinned, so it was quite easy. But leaving my safe environment, safe in quotes, and going to school, growing up, then I realized, there is light skin privileges out here that I am not getting. And thank God that I was not affected. I've never, it's not something that, there are moments where I saw my friends getting light skin privileges, it's even in songs by my community really, especially men, they really give more, they value lighter skin women. It's something that is known. It's like if you have a big career, you're doing well. Most men, when they're starting off, they have a dark-skinned wife. And then the minute they rise up, they get a lighter-skinned woman. It's just, yeah. It happens. Even in songs, you need to actually be very dark-skinned or very or light-skinned. Like the people who are in the middle, it's like you don't exist. But somehow, I think because my parents insisted on performance, it really helped. But also that is also another Pandora's box, because why do you have to prove your worth? Just by existing, you are worthy. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of protection. You are worthy for just existing. That's it. And that's what it has taken me time to understand that. I don't need to perform, to be worthy. And I instill that in my children. But I think colorism, this is just one of those things that we have to talk about and continue talking about. Because why is it that now on TikTok, I see grown women being sold Carolite. Carolite that 20 years ago, people knew Carolite, people should not use Carolite. Now you see influencers from the US talking about, this is how to take care of your hyperpigmentation. And we have teenagers on these apps and they're using Carolite. We all know the dark side of these skin lightening procedures. If not creams, they are pills. But as a society, there's only so much you can do. So let's start the conversations in the house. Yeah, there's a children's book, but maybe written for adults too. And then the last book that I read, which I also listened to as an audiobook, that was a 5-star read, is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hapman and translated by Rose Schwartz, yeah. And this is a dystopian novel, a very enchanting read, a strange book, but very enchanting. It has the simplest plot, very simple. We meet a group of women where the narrator is the child. She's in a cage with other women, a group of 40 women. They do not know how they came into this cage, when they came into this cage, which date it is, what is going on. And then one day something happens and the gates open because they are being guarded. The guards are gone and they can come out. And we start off with them. So it's like we join them. I was one of these women, and the narrator was amazing. There's so many thoughts that came to me in this book. I was just like, is there a necessity for men? As I was reading this, do we really need men? I thought about the fact that no life is ordinary. Like sometimes you go through life and you're just thinking, okay, I'm leading an ordinary. No life is ordinary. There's something special in each and everyone's life. It takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child, because The narrator was young when she came into this cage that they were in. And they've all taken care of her. They all took care of her. It was just a reminder that, yeah, we all need a village. Even as adults, we need some sort of village. And nothing just happens. It's like, in this book, nothing really, there's no big plot twist, but we are moving. We are moving, the book moves, and nothing is explained. So it's up to you to, this book was just mind-blowing. I even thought about the author, because the author was, I believe, she's Jewish. She was Jewish, and during the Nazi period, she's Dutch. So they moved from Holland and escaped. I'm not so sure where they escaped to. And I think, in my opinion, that really also affected them, because there's also a part of her life where, like, for some years she was sick, she had tuberculosis and was isolated for like 2 years. I think all these things are some of a life well lived, is what she wrote in this book. It was just, there's just so much. I'm just thinking about wherever you are, like, there's a reason for you existing, but you have to keep on doing something, because, like the narrator, I don't want to spoil it. I have to say, this was one of the weirdest books that I've ever read, but still, it didn't make sense, but it makes so much sense. It's a book that, to me, will never be, you cannot say when was it set. It could be set 100 years before. It could be set now, where women's rights are being taken away. It can be set in 100 years in future, where we don't know what kind of rights, because it's like we are taking steps backward. That's probably where we are headed. It's just, yeah, dystopian, but it felt real, because of the world that we are living in right now. 5-star read. If there were more stars, I could give it to it. I could give it more stars if I was able to. An amazing read. So that was a long rambling reading wrap up, but I absolutely enjoyed my reading in January, and I hope that you did too. Please let me know, which books did you read in January, which book stood out for you, and just generally, how are you doing? I hope that you are okay, and hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.